Okay, let's move on to the
On va
Q&A
passer aux
session.
questions. Donc j'ai
We
deux
have
collègues
two
qui vont
colleagues
tourner dans la
with
salle
roaming
avec des
microphones and
micros.
they will be circulating in the
Euh,
room. Please wait for the
S'il vous plaît,
microphone to
on
ask
va
a
prendre au
question.
départ
We will
une
take one
question par
question
personne. Je
per
sais que souvent des gens ont beaucoup de
person.
questions.
We cannot allow you
Aujourd'hui, on
to
va
ask
prendre qu'une question. On va
too
pas
many
avoir des
questions,
questions
unfortunately.
personnelles.
And
Même si on a
please,
des
no
neurologues,
personal
j'essaierai
questions.
en
We
même
have three
temps de
neurologists here,
savoir
but we're
que ce
not
n'est pas
in
une
a
consultation de
neurology
neurologie, donc on ne répondra pas à des questions
medical
personnelles. On va
consultation. So
vraiment
please
répondre
don't
aux
ask
questions
any
qui sont
personal questions, but rather
après
ask questions about
ce
the
qu'on a
presentations that were
discuté
made today. So
aujourd'hui. Donc
raise your
n'hésitez pas à
hand if you
lever la
want to
main. Mes
ask a
collègues
question
viendront vers vous.
and you will be
On
given a
va commencer
microphone.
par une
We
question.
also have
On a reçu
questions
des questions en
online,
ligne.
so we
On va
need
un peu
to
jongler avec les différents orateurs.
ask both types of questions.
Et j'ai
This
une question, je pense,
question
qui est
from
valable
an
pour
online
tous.
viewer
C'est comment,
is how to
comment
select the patients
sélectionner les
for the
patients pour
studies
les
and
études et
how
comment on
what
fait
should we do
pour
to
participer à
participate
une de
in
ces
one of the
études
two
qui
studies,
sont
the
en cours,
sleep
l'étude sommeil,
disorder
l'étude
study and the
neurologique. Si aujourd'hui on a
Lady
quelqu'un
PD
qui
study.
souhaite
So if anyone
participer,
wants to
comment
participate,
il doit s'y
what should they
prendre?
do? Should
Est-ce qu'il
they
doit forcément habiter
live
dans
in
un
one
des
of the
centres?
cities where
Est-ce
the
que si on
centers
habite
are,
à une
or if they
certaine
live
distance,
away
on peut
from one of
même
those
y aller parce qu'il
centers,
n'y a pas de
can they
plan?
maybe travel to the
Je ne sais pas
center?
laquelle de vous deux veut
Maybe you
répondre en
can
premier.
both
Vous
answer
pouvez
the
répondre
question.
toutes les deux.
What
Alors, je pense que le
the
plus
easiest
simple,
thing to
c'est de se
do would be
rapprocher
to
du centre
contact the
dans lequel, enfin,
center
ouais,
closest to where you
le plus
live.
proche, quoi.
Obviously, it's
C'est
better
juste
if
le
it's your
neurologue traitant
neurologist, your
qui
attending
envoie
neurologist who
qui adresse
sends you
pour ce type de
to
traitement
addresses you, refers you
au
to one of
centre.
those
Par
centers.
exemple, à
In
Paris,
Paris,
on
we
a
have
des arcs qui peuvent voilà, être enfin, en collaboration
collaborations
avec
with
les
other
hôpitaux
neurologists in
quartiers,
other
d'autres
hospitals.
neurologues, même d'autres
They will
centres.
refer the
Donc ça se
patients to us.
gérera
So
via
everything
le
should
neurologue.
go through the
Et
neurologist. But
on a
as a
des
patient, you
possibilités de
may
consultation
ask your
pour
neurologist
solliciter
to
ce neurologue
refer you
qui
to one of those
dispositif.
centers.
On
And you know,
passe
it's
aussi
more
par le
useful for
neurologue,
us
c'est
to
aussi
go through
pour
the
avoir des
neurologist
questions
because we
sur
can then
c'est vrai
obtain
que
detailed
c'est
information regarding the
parfois
patient.
d'avoir un petit
We
peu
sometimes need
des
to
informations
find out
pointues
more about the
et
patient, things
voilà,
that only the
donc
neurologist will know. So we
c'est
need the
plus
help of the professional.
voilà. En tout cas,
In
dans
the
l'étude
SUMPARC
SAMPARC, il n'y a pas vraiment de
study,
critères
there
de
are no
recrutement.
inclusion criteria.
Faut avoir la
So
fiche
you have to
de la
be
sécurité sociale.
registered with the
Peu
Sécurité
importe le
Sociale
stade
health
dans lequel
insurance, but in, depending on the
voilà,
stage of your
c'est un
disease, you
minimum
have
de
to spend 3 days in
l'hôpital
hospital
avec un
wearing lots of
ventilateur
sensors. So you have to
voilà,
be okay with
accepté.
that. It's
Enfin,
not very
c'est
funny.
pas
It's
agréable,
not painful, but it's not
douloureux, mais
not very
voilà,
nice
en
because
fait,
you can't really move
c'est
around so easily when you're
mais
covered
bon.
in sensors. The same for the
C'est
Lady
la même
PD
chose pour
study?
l'étude Lady PD.
Well, yes.
Oui, alors c'est la même chose en fait.
We enroll
Nous,
patients who
on évalue
already
les patients,
are
soit qui sont déjà
being
suivis
treated in one of
sous
our
chaque
centers.
centre,
But we
mais
collaborate with
aussi
a number of
avec
neurologists. There are
les
community
référents,
neurologists who will
les
select
filles qui
the
sélectionnent en fait les
patients
patients qu'elles nous
and
adressent.
refer to us those patients who are interested and willing to
Donc moi,
participate.
je vous ai
Well,
fait
I'd
un peu de
like
la
to
publicité pour France
advertise
Parkinson
France
là à l'instant.
Parkinson.
On a donc
On
sur
our
notre site
website, there is
internet,
a
on a vraiment une
dedicated
page qui est
page for
dédiée
clinical
aux
trials
essais
that are
cliniques de
recruiting,
recrutement
enrolling
en
patients in
France.
France. There's also a
Donc on
poster
a un poster
just
aussi
outside.
là-bas. Euh,
I mean, nothing
on
new
n'a rien
here. We're
inventé, hein. On reprend
simply
les informations qui sont
using the information
sur
from
les
the other
différents essais
clinical
cliniques. Et
trials,
il y a
and
les
there are
contacts,
contact names,
les
people you
personnes à
need to
contacter.
contact.
Donc nous, ce qu'on dit toujours aux gens, c'est voilà, vous ne voyez pas un
If
médecin,
you
il
want
faut
to
contacter votre
participate in a
centre. Si
clinical
vous voyez un médecin,
trial,
un
you
essai
should
clinique,
talk to your
c'est vraiment pour parler
neurologist.
au neurologue.
And there are
Il y a le
inclusion and
critère
exclusion
d'inclusion et
criteria.
d'exclusion.
So
Il y
the
a le
neurologist,
premier
the
filtre, le
hospital or community
neurologue
neurologist
clinique
will
et
need
médical va
to
bien
check whether
savoir.
you
Si
match the
voilà, si
inclusion
vous voulez
criteria. They don't want to give
participer, il
you
faut pas
false
avoir de
hopes
faux
either.
espoirs non plus.
And the
Et
neurologist
vraiment
may
d'avoir le
contact the
neurologue qui
center
contacte après le
and
centre, de voir
check
comment
what
faire.
can be done.
Souvent, je vais le dire peut-être,
You don't need to live in
il ne faut
Nantes,
pas
Paris,
forcément
or
habiter à Nantes,
Grenoble.
à Paris, à
But
Grenoble.
in
Il
that
y a des fois
case,
des frais de déplacement
if
qui
you
sont
need to
prévus en
travel to one of the
financement et qui
centers,
permettent à des gens qui
your
habitent
travel
dans une
expenses
résidence
will be covered. I
raisonnable
mean, we have
de
that in
pouvoir
the
se
budget
déplacer avec des
already.
frais de déplacement couverts.
Oui, on suggère quand même qu'elle soit dans la région
If you live in
limitrophe.
Marseille,
Bon,
you
si
don't want to
quelqu'un
go to
habite
the
à
Grenoble
Marseille, il ne va
center,
pas aller à
obviously.
Grenoble.
And
Il
if
faudra
you,
faire. Mais voilà, si
if
on a un
but if
train
you live in a
direct, on peut
place
y
that
arriver, ça peut
has
être aussi une
a
solution. Si on n'a
train
pas être un
station that
frein
will take
à
you to
essayer
the
ou envie de
center,
participer.
it's possible.
Merci.
Is there a
Est-ce qu'il y a une
question from
question
the
dans la salle?
audience?
Là-bas
Yes,
au
I have a
fond.
question for
Oui,
Professor
j'ai
De
une question pour
Kinderen.
professeur
Professor,
Derkinderen.
have any trials been
Professeur, est-ce qu'il y a eu des
conducted
études de faire
regarding the
la
relationship
relation
between the
microbiote et
microbiota and the
la
gut
maladie de
in
Parkinson?
Parkinson's disease? Yes, of course, your question is relevant. Several studies have been conducted, again, based on the idea that the gut microbiota is in close contact with the gut cells and not very far from the gut neurons. and so there may be an influence. But mostly, in most studies, if we analyze the bacteria, the gut bacteria, we find that they are different between the people who suffer from Parkinson's disease versus somebody who doesn't suffer from the disease. And most of the studies have provided positive results. I can't remember really, but I think there are something like 25 or 30 studies available. And the microbiota issue is a bit complex. Depends on where you live and your eating habits. In China, obviously, they eat different things, so they have different microbiota. But bear in mind that some results have provided negative results, and either they have not been published or they have been published in a much more confidential way. Many subjects need to be analyzed. So to keep this short, one might think, okay, if we analyze the GI bacteria that are present in the stool and we have a marker of the disease. No, it doesn't work that way. Unfortunately, there is too much overlapping. There is not enough difference so that it could be used as a marker. So yes, there may be differences. They're not always the same, so it's not always reproducible. And again, we always talk about the positive studies and less about the negative studies. There are differences and they may play a role in the disease modulation, but they can't be used as a marker, as something that you do every day. You give the lab a stool sample and they tell you whether you have the disease or not, the same way that you would do it with a blood sample. Unfortunately, we can't do it so far. Well, you just answered a question that was asked online. Could this be a diagnostic tool better than MRI? Well, no, I mean, MRI, some people tried. We had a collaboration with a company, with Alexandra Chervino from Luxia Scientific. They tried to do it. They said, okay, it's going to be relatively expensive, but could it be a marker? And it didn't work out that way. There's too much overlapping. If we take somebody at random, we can't say, oh, you have Parkinson's disease with an 80 or 90% accuracy. Maybe with more refined examinations, it would be possible, but that means it's more complex. You need more complex equipment to find a marker. It doesn't work that way yet. Okay, I'll move back to a question that has been asked online, back to sleep disorders. The question is, what is the percentage of people who simultaneously have all the sleep disorders, insomnia, RPD, etc.? I can't remember exactly, but I think we did that. We looked into that in the iceberg study. It was a La Pitié-Salpêtrière cohort of patients, and we looked at the 5 sleep disorders: insomnia, somnolence, RBD, restless legs, and sleep apnea. But unfortunately, off the cuff, I can't remember. What I can tell you is that if we talk about co-occurrence, very often patients had 2 of those sleep disorders, but there was no preferential co-occurrence. Insomnia was not necessarily more associated with somnolence than RBD. The only association we found was difficulties going to sleep with the restless leg syndrome, which can be expected. It's normal. When you have restless legs, you have trouble going to sleep. So that was the one correlation that was to be expected. But the co-occurrence is frequent, but there is no specific order which symptoms goes with which symptoms. So you shouldn't worry if you have one disorder, doesn't mean you're going to have another disorder. People worry. They think, okay, if I have this disorder, I'm going to have another one. There was a question from the audience at the back of the room. Yes, question for Dr. Daudet. You said there was not necessarily a correlation between day somnolence and sleepiness and sleepless nights, but is there a correlation with the fact that people take drugs during the day and they have they suffer from sleepiness, somnolence, they fall asleep during the day? Well, that issue is multifactorial. There are several reasons. If you don't sleep well at night, it may lead to you being sleepy during the day. But the biggest share is the medication. And that's why it changes in time when the therapy changes. And there is also the vigilance centers that can be involved in the disease, and so that leads to sleepiness. I had patients who had sleep apnea and did not sleep well because they had motor symptoms during the night. They could not recover well during the night and they fell asleep during the day. And when we improved the motor symptoms, their sleepiness or somnolence during the day was improved. So we tried to improve sleepiness, sleep quality during the night and to improve sleepiness during the day, but it's not that simple. Especially dopaminergic agonists play an essential role. We will go back to Lady PD. If there is symptom hormone correlation, would a hormonal treatment be a possible complementary therapy to Parkinson's disease? It's a very relevant question. Thank you. We are at the preliminary stages. Obviously, we're trying to document as well and analyze motor fluctuations and see whether dopaminergic therapy can be adapted. The anti-Parkinson therapy can be efficient. But also, we can think about hormonal treatment. But again, this is going to be fairly complicated because there are secondary adverse events and it's sometimes difficult. It has impacts on general health. So it's a bit too early for us to think about that. We will start by checking whether by adjusting the dopaminergic therapy, we can improve the symptoms. Maybe the next question will be for you as well. Can menopause play a role in Parkinson's disease? Can it be a triggering factor, triggering Parkinson's disease? There have been a few studies. It's not very clear. There are contradictory data. Some studies showed that during menopause, with all the hormonal changes, the Parkinson's disease frequency could increase, but other studies could not find an increase in the prevalence of Parkinson's disease in postmenopausal women. So we still need a large epidemiological study, and we don't have that kind of large population study. Okay, thank you. We will go back to a question from the audience. Professor Der Kinderen, could stress be responsible for an inflammatory state that could prevent the neurons from folding appropriately? Because I don't really see the connection between the brain and the gut. The brain cleans itself and the gut doesn't. So could there be a connection there? That is a difficult question. Your question is very relevant, but it's difficult. Regarding the role played by stress in the disease, it's very difficult. It may play a role, and you're right. Having a general state of inflammation, well, digestive, but also elsewhere, a general inflammatory disease, meaning you have a certain inflammatory state, that is not good. And that is definitely a risk factor. People have a tendency to develop the disease if they have a general state of inflammation. However, for the next part of your question, I don't really know because stress is so variable, so difficult to quantify in in man. To my knowledge, there are no well-conducted studies that will help us quantify that. The only data we have is interesting, but to be taken with a pinch of salt, because they are coming from animal models. It's easy to stress a mouse. Some mice may have Parkinson symptoms when they're stressed, and we can stress them in a rather reproducible way. It's easier to do, is more easily done in animals than in man, because in man there are other factors. But there is a limitation in all the animal models. It's very difficult because this is a human disease, and therefore animal models are artificial. Mice, again, do not develop a real Parkinson's disease. They only develop the symptoms. So we think that, yes, there may be a connection. But, I think it's difficult to demonstrate, at least in a very formal way in man. One question from the back of the room. Can CBD do something for Parkinson's disease? Because people start talking about the effect CBD could have on Parkinson's disease. It's not the subject for today, but it's interesting. Cannabis and Parkinson, people have been discussing it for quite some time. It was very fashionable 4 or 5 years ago. It was very fashionable. Now, there are ups and downs. I mean, in the years 2000, 25 years ago, we have cannabis receptors in our brain. And possibly there is a connection between CBD, THC, and possibly there is an effect with the molecules we release, endocannabinoids. And apparently, cannabis receptors were very close to dopamine receptors. And there are many. There are 7 times more cannabis receptors than dopamine receptors. And so we don't know really what they're useful for, but they're very close. And they act on similar molecular targets. So we thought that might be interesting. And we found that cannabis could be a modulator of cannabinoid receptors, a modulator of dopamine receptors. That they acted as partners. And it triggered quite a few studies on what it could do to take tetrahydrocannabinol or more pure derivatives on Parkinson's disease. But the studies were rather disappointing. It didn't do better than placebo at the time. But for CBD, yes, it acts the same way. So there's a rationale, there's a biological rationale. It makes sense. It's not stupid to think it could do something, but right now, the kind of evidence we expected in a placebo-controlled study, we didn't achieve that. But there is a rationale. We think maybe there is something there. And if we look at the story of cannabis, hemp in diseases, 25 years ago, we swept it under the carpet because the studies did not.
Thank you. We're going to be going back to sleep. Have there been studies on REM improvement? Yes, absolutely. With deep stimulation, it improves the quality of sleep, the total amount of deep sleep, and it's been proven to be positive on sleep. Thanks to the mechanism that insomnia and Parkinson's disease, as I was saying, depending on the stage of the disease, whether it's at the beginning or the middle, the causes evolve, and when there are fluctuations, when you're off, blockage happens more often. It can happen at night, and it's very uncomfortable. The patient wakes up because their sleep is of bad quality. They're stuck, they can't move in their bed, they're in pain, and so on. So treating them for motor symptoms throughout the night improves the whole picture. And so this can come into play. Yes, what about the subcutaneous pumps? Some people use it only at night. Yes, there was a study, apomorphy, launched by Flamand Rose and Cochin, and we tested apomorphine only at night, and the patients felt that their sleep had improved. And initially, they suffered from insomnia and motor fluctuations, and they saw their sleep improving. So I'll get back to online questions, and then we'll get back to the room. I have a question dealing with what do you expect with a better knowledge of sleep disorders? Are the existing drugs not good enough? Yes, well, we do have lots of resources, but we still don't quite fully understand. It's like successive layers, one on top of the other. And it's interesting to get a broader view of things because most studies focus on one specific symptom, and there was no study exploring the causes of insomnia because there are multiple causes, as well as the causes of drowsiness. So it's interesting to maybe take a look at what part each element plays, each cause plays, and then there are all the markers of sleep, which illustrates the way the brain works. We know that sleep has a regulatory effect, that it helps eliminate toxins, and so on. So are those markers already altered? And analyzing the links with the clinical condition might answer a number of questions we have. There was a question in the room for Professor Der Kinderen. Could you tell us about the state of research on glial cells, please? Yes. Again, this is trendy, but a difficult analysis. Of course, we could talk about glial cells in the gut, and I haven't talked about it voluntarily, but these cells are support cells. The better known are astrocytes in the gut, in the brain, and we have the equivalent in the gut. Just like in the brain, there are many more of them than there are neurons. There might be 8 glial cells for one neuron, and they probably play a very important role. They're not only there for support, but they have an energetic side to them and neurotransmitter role as well. Now, for the gut, there have been some studies of the enteric glial cells. They're difficult to study because of their very specific morphology. It's difficult for us to count them. If we just want a cross-section and identify whether there are many or not many of them, it's very difficult because their morphology is very specific. But it would be interesting to analyze them and to see take a look at the ones in the brain. This is a very interesting topic, but even outside of the disease, it's highly complex, but it's a very relevant question. It could be an interesting marker, but once again, it's a very small world, and these cells are not ideal for a biological study. And I suggest you go and look at the poster of a young researcher about glial cells out there. There's a question at the back and then one question in front. Last year, France Parkinson had organized a conference on nutrition. This year, we're learning that our microbiota is similar to that of a person not suffering from the disease. Is it wrong to conclude that we should maybe look for a better diet, more balance, without expecting any effect on the disease? That's an excellent question. There's also always this link between nutrition, microbiota, and health, and so on. As you were saying, there are slight differences, and some strategies can be offered in order to play on these small differences between Parkinson's patients and those who don't suffer from the disease. Some things are being offered, but for now, we are not familiar enough with all of these bacteria. There's their makeup, but their function, and what metabolics they might secrete. Maybe in the future, when we are familiar with the metabolism of all these bacteria, we'll be able to give finer advice regarding nutrition. But for now, something is true for any type of pathology. Having something, a quite diverse diet with, but there's no scientific basis to say you have this type of microbiota, you need to take this or eat that, and so on, in order to improve your microbiota. For now, we're not there. But when we've achieved a finer analysis and we can go beyond the makeup and look at the function and metabolism, maybe we could be more precise, more accurate. But for now, we can't do it, and you can't really differentiate. Yes, as you're saying, though, it's better for everyone to eat healthier food, less processed foods, and that's true for everyone. These are virtuous circles that we're trying to implement, but we do have another question at the back of the room. Yes, about the same topic, nutrition. You were saying before that when there is an inflammation, it doesn't improve the symptoms of the disease. So, do you promote anti-inflammatory diets, excluding gluten and dairy products, so as to reduce inflammation and the issues it leads to? Well, actually, no, and I haven't talked about it. For some people suffering from the disease, there's a bit of digestive inflammation, and I didn't include it due to time constraints. What we can do in order to measure digestive inflammation is based on the biopsies. We can analyze certain molecules which are important for inflammation called cytokines. And the same thing is true here. For some people, it'll be slightly high. If we analyze 50 to 60 people suffering from the disease, it's a bit higher than for non-patients. And in some studies, we found differences, and we need to be very honest. In some, we found no difference overall. So, but for digestive inflammation, it may play a role. And for broccoli, for example, which is anti-inflammatory, it was tested with the disease, and it doesn't change things much, really. So, other than in the case people have very specific indications, when we see people in consultation, they say, oh, I've adopted an anti-inflammatory diet. There's no contraindication, but we have no definite scientific evidence to support it either. And we have no way of measuring it either. I'll briefly give you an example, which is fecal transplants. The Finnish tried, there's a specialist there who works really well, and then he doesn't have any inflammation markers in order to assess the changes, if any. This is a highly complex topic, and we have a question. Can we ask for a biopsy apart from the case where the patient's prescribed a coloscopy? Well, when a coloscopy is performed by a gastroenterologist, it is put in paraffin blocks, and then you cannot analyze the neurons correctly for historical reasons. We participated in a number of studies showing that we cannot analyze the presence of neurons and pathologies unless the biopsies are desiccated, as I showed you. And that can only be done in a gastroenterology lab. You can't ask for an additional biopsy. You could. There's no point in asking for an additional one. Another question for Professor Kinderen. Are there any studies dealing with the vitamin B overdosed? Maybe B1. No, I don't think so, but I don't know. There may be. People often talk about it during consultation. There are clinical cases, but maybe I don't know enough. I don't think there's a classic study where we've compared populations who've been supplemented with vitamin B1 and compared with placebo. No, there have only been open studies. It's an Italian doctor during his studies, and he died from COVID, and he treated many patients with vitamin B1, but there's no classic studies against placebo. There are things with a combination B1, B12 as well, but not in traditional placebo studies. Let's move away from the gut a bit. Could migraine be linked to Parkinson's? These are very specific questions. According to me, from what I know, there hasn't been any study analyzing the link between migraines and Parkinson's. So I don't think there's a direct link. And that's one of the most frequent symptoms during periods. It would be interesting to carry out a study within the framework of our study of hormonal fluctuations. But from what I know, we don't have any data about this. Another question said, could Lady PD lead to other research studies? Yes, this is a pilot study to describe the fluctuations during periods, and if we can confirm this, one of the secondary objectives is to see whether there are differences in symptoms between women under the contraceptive pill and others, or IUDs. This will give us indications in order to set up other studies. As we were saying before, under the influence of hormonal treatments. But Lady PD is a study which needs to be carried out at a larger scale in order to consolidate the data, and then we can target other symptoms or other treatments. Yes, listening to you, we understand why research doesn't move fast enough, because you need to take the time, because you need to confirm the results and check and so on. It's true that there are no new solutions being offered right now, and this is the objective, but there's a lot being done on Parkinson's disease, and knowledge increases, which leads to a possibility of improving treatments. And this is coming, but you carry out a survey or a study on 100 people, but then you need to confirm the results and expand it and so on, and it takes time. Yes, clinical studies take time in order to achieve sturdy data and to control the safety issues or aspects of what we're offering you. So we're working for you. It takes time, but we're moving ahead. And it takes time to make sure that what's going to be offered is safe. So we're going to move on to non-drug treatments. And what about meditation or self-induced trance in order to improve sleep? And I'm just reading what's written here. Meditation, maybe? Yes, well, meditation is very good for everyone, for sleep, and especially efficient on ruminations and anxiety, because you can then train to let go of your thoughts in order to relax and be able to finally fall asleep. I think it's interesting. It's an additional tool. What about self-hypnosis? Yes, it's not exactly the same thing, but all of this is part, has the same objective in order to stop ruminating and the flow of thoughts, preventing sleep. Don't hesitate in the room if you have questions. Thank you very much. There's many of us here today, which means there are many patients. We know the progression year after year. Can we measure the evolution curve given the number of baby boomers who are more prone to this disease? And a more general question, you just referred to research. How is France doing for research? Do we have enough resources? And are there other countries in the world which are at the forefront of research for Parkinson's disease? Well, I didn't say that we weren't carrying out enough research. I think we're doing a lot. Resources, obviously, we always need more resources, but carrying out clinical research also means recruiting people, which isn't always easy. It's people dedicating time to research. Cutting edge countries, I think that France carries out a lot of very good research. But I'll hand the floor to the neurologist. Well, I tend to agree with you. And if you look at the research activity and you look at France, it's very dynamic. There are many teams who are really high quality. Of course, there are centers in the US which are maybe more targeted and so on. In Canada, in the UK. So you see, things have changed for the past few years, and I'm an old guy now. I've seen things developing. About 20 years ago, it was very difficult to launch something and to start. And things are always the same. There's national or European level funding. And of course, if we apply for this funding, there's almost no chance to get it. But right now, there's a diversity of opportunities, and it's linked to local and more specific associations. So if there's an emerging project being launched by somebody younger, not well known, I think it's easier to apply and achieve funding, because we now have specific funding for Parkinson's. And some funding is now provided through France Parkinson. There are many possibilities now. So honestly, it's not too bad. And of course, it's not just the funding, but it's also the ideas, the underlying ideas. So not everything is perfect, but it's doable. And I think that there are, even in France, many teams who are you've heard about sleep. In Bordeaux, they're good at molecular levels. There are teams at the CEA, at Salpêtrière. They also work at the molecular levels. In Lyon. So for Parkinson's, it's not bad. It's always very difficult to compare, but we're not ridiculous, even though nothing's ever perfect. But I think that we can, and the association network, which goes beyond the national and European funding, offers us many possibilities, which are quite interesting. I'd like to add something regarding funding. In France, we're very lucky to have this network of Parkinson expert centers. So you never live very far from a Parkinson expert center. We've seen it today. We've presented research projects where there are several centers cooperating. So at the French level, there's a real wish to cooperate, and the clinical trials have proven it, and they cooperate at the international level as well. In the past, they all wanted to work in silos so as to get the funding and keep it. And I think that mentalities have evolved. We now have international consortiums combining different expertise. We have physicists and chemists who are going to work with clinicians in order to get as much data as possible. And when I used to do research, people used to work for themselves, but now it's either prerequisite or highly recommended. So things have really changed. And I'd like to add something. We increasingly ask for the opinion of the patients in order to develop a clinical protocol. It's not just the researchers or the clinicians, the physicians who are going to decide. Right from the start, we ask the opinion of the patients to see whether what they're thinking about doing is feasible, will be adopted, is it feasible, and is it worth doing? And this is something quite new. We're very proud because we're very involved with this. And now that we've started, we've had an increasing number of requests. And it's very interesting because it increases the possibility of success. And then regarding the curve, I will give the floor back to you. I'm going to launch the debate because there's no formal response and I have no knowledge of statistics. Some people are very pessimistic. There's a Dutch man who specializes in the disease, and he sees curves, very negative curves, and other people are a lot more cautious. I don't know where we're at. Well, it's quite difficult. Our progression curve is still quite pessimistic. Yeah, it's working. If I can add something, it's that the population is aging, so the progression is just like other neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, is also going to increase, and that's linked to the general aging of the population. But there are also the environmental factors such as pesticides, plastics. We don't know what influence that might have, but the forecasts are not very optimistic. And I think it's a real the EU has launched major funding in order to assess the impact of environmental factors on neurodegenerative diseases, but not only. There have been many calls for tenders in order to analyze the effects of PFAS or fine particles and so on. So a lot is being done in order to work on prevention. So this is also very trendy. We're getting to the end of our session. Last question. I have a question. I'd like to know whether Grenoble could become an expert center for pregnant women, for example, diagnosed with Parkinson's, who are often a bit lost, don't necessarily have an answer from their neurologist regarding how to adapt the treatment, what evolution there might be. That's a difficult question. Well, actually, right now, we don't intend to become an expert center for women suffering from Parkinson's disease, but we never know. It could be a potential evolution or a future project. Now, that's a very small percentage of PD patients. But at the scientific level, as I said before, the patients are different and between men and women. Then we can develop a more targeted or customized care in each center. I hope that this raises awareness to Parkinson's disease in women. But why not? We never thought of developing a center, but it could be a project for the future. The last question, maybe? There are more men than women suffering from Parkinson's disease, and I read that women would be protected up to the menopause. Well, as I was saying, some studies gave contradictory results regarding the protection of certain hormones. There were studies carried out on hormone replacement therapies in menopausal women who've shown an increase of the frequency of the disease in certain cases, and in other cases, no changes in the incidence of Parkinson. But when you talk about protection factors, it's very difficult to say whether menopause can be or not be a protection factor. There are many other factors that come into play regarding the risk for Parkinson's, and again, we don't have any epidemiological studies with a targeted objective dealing with this issue in particular, giving us any accurate answers. Thank you very much. We're going to conclude here. It's just like the Oscar ceremony. We're going to have to thank everybody. And for those of you who are online, there's a satisfaction questionnaire. We're going to ask you to answer it. For those of you who are in the room, they were put on your chairs, so you're probably sitting on them. Don't hesitate to fill them out and give them to us before you leave. It really helps us improve these meetings. The conferences are finished. I would like to thank the speakers who came, sometimes from very far. So thank you. I think that they were able to talk to the general public. So thank you very much for being present here today. We can give them a hand. And I really wanted to thank the volunteers from France Parkinson who work throughout France. Some of them were here today, and I hope you were able to talk to them and see what activities they're offering. So thanks to them for coming. Thanks to all of our France Parkinson's committees. We can applaud them as well. And I'd like to thank my colleagues who've made it possible to set up this event. Of course, you have the people who are behind the black curtain who've been here for the
Ils nous
past 4
accompagnent depuis
years.
4 ans et vraiment
And it's
c'est un grand
really
plaisir de
pleasant to
travailler avec
work
eux. Leur
with them. They're
professionnalité nous permet
very
vraiment
highly professional.
d'organiser l'événement sans
It
souci.
enables us
Et
to
il n'y a jamais de
organize the
problème, tout va
event
bien.
without
Donc
any
vraiment merci
problem.
à eux encore comme chaque fois.
And one last
Et un
thank
dernier
you
remerciement, j'en oublie
for
sans doute,
all
mais
of
c'est vraiment
our
pour tous nos
donors
donateurs, tous
and
nos adhérents.
members, because
Parce que
if
si
France
France Parkinson
Parkinson
peut financer la
can
recherche aujourd'hui, c'est
finance
grâce aux dons.
research, it's thanks
Donc
to
vraiment merci à eux.
donations.
J'espère
So
qu'aujourd'hui on a pu
thank
un
you
peu
really.
présenter
And I hope
les
that we
différentes
were
choses
able
qu'on
to
soutient en France et il y a beaucoup de choses, on va faire
present
des
a
choix.
number of things we've been
Si vous voulez
doing.
en savoir
If
plus,
you want to know
l'année
more
prochaine on
about
sera à
it,
Paris. On parlera
next
de recherche très
Saturday
fondamentale.
we'll
Donc
be in
vraiment
Paris.
les
The
chercheurs dans les
researchers in
laboratoires
the
qui essayent vraiment de
labs will
vulgariser
be
la recherche très
focusing
moléculaire, très
on
cellulaire.
molecular
Vous
and
pouvez,
cellular
si vous n'habitez
research.
pas proche de
And if
Paris,
you
vous
don't
pouvez
live
voir en ligne
anywhere near
tout ce
Paris,
qui
you
est
can
possible
watch it
aujourd'hui.
online.
Merci à
Thank
vous tous
you
qui êtes
to
venus
all of
aujourd'hui,
you who've
enfin aux
come
gens qui
here,
vous êtes déplacés. Merci aux gens qui
and
nous ont
to
suivis
those who are
en ligne.
online.
Je pense que
You
vous
can
pouvez vous
applaud
applaudir aussi tous si vous êtes
yourselves,
venus jusque-là.
and
Donc merci
thank
vraiment,
you to
merci à
everyone.
tout le monde. Et donc
So we
on
have
a
water
bon,
and
on a aussi des
biscuits. I
petits.
think you've
Je
been
pense que ça
sitting
fait
for
2 heures
2
que vous êtes
hours.
assis, donc voilà,
It's not
c'est pas
fruit,
des fruits, c'est pas
carrots,
des
or
carottes, c'est pas des
apples,
pommes,
it's
c'est des petits
biscuits,
biscuits, c'est un peu la récompense. On a des tucs aussi un peu plus salés
sweet
pour ceux
and
qui préfèrent, donc n'hésitez pas,
savory.
on va les mettre un
So
peu partout.
don't hesitate to
N'hésitez pas à continuer
continue
à aller
walking
voir et
around,
encore
and
merci
thank
à
you
vous.
again.